March 15th, 1943. 22 arc hours. The North Atlantic, 500 miles south of Greenland. The biting cold of the North Atlantic seeped through the steel hull of U-333, a pervasive dampness that no amount of engine heat could ever truly dispel. In the control room, the air was thick with the smell of diesel fuel, sweat, and stale cabbage. Kapitänleutnant Peter Kremer, the young, hawk-faced commander, stood hunched over the chart table, its surface illuminated by a single hooded lamp. His fingers traced a course west, towards the expected path of convoy HX-229. For 3 days, they had run on the surface, charging batteries and pushing hard to reach the intercept coordinates provided by BDU, U-Boat Command, in Lorient. They were part of a larger Wolfpack. Unversagt, dauntless, a dozen steel sharks converging on what should be a rich feeding ground. "Any contact from Sea Teufel?" Kremer asked, his voice low. The lead U-boat, Sea Teufel, Sea Devil, was meant to be the pack's eyes, shadowing the convoy and broadcasting homing signals. The radio operator, a boy from Hamburg with perpetually chapped lips, shook his head. "Nothing, Herr Callot. Static, and then nothing. It's as if they vanished." Kremer grunted, a non-committal sound that masked a growing unease. He straightened up, his ears tuning to the familiar symphony of his boat, the low hum of the electric motors, the creak of pressure on the hull, the faint hiss of the listening gear in the sonar operator's headphones. He climbed the ladder into the conning tower, pushing open the hatch to the bridge. The night air hit him like a physical blow, clean and sharp and freezing. Above, the sky was a vast star-dusted blackness, the sea a heaving, ink-black plain, perfect conditions for a surface attack. His watch officer, Lieutenant Zur Say Brandt, stood silhouetted against the night, his binoculars pressed to his eyes. "A clear night, Captain. Good hunting weather." "Perhaps," Kremer murmured. He swept his own glasses across the horizon. Nothing, no smudge of smoke, no dark silhouette of a freighter, no faint glow of a careless porthole. Just an immense, empty darkness. For 2 more hours, U-333 prowled the calculated intercept point, her crew tense, expectant. The hydrophone operator reported only the distant, mournful song of a whale. Then, at Eddervero 17, the radio crackled to life. It was not the triumphant signal from Sea Teufel, but a frantic, broken transmission from another pack member, U-384. Under attack, destroyers, multiple contacts, they came out of nowhere. The transmission dissolved into a screech of static. A cold knot tightened in Kremer's stomach. U-384 was 30 miles to the southeast. They shouldn't have been near the convoy's projected path. Not yet. An hour later, a signal from BDU arrived, its encoded message quickly translated by the radio officer. The orders were simple and utterly baffling. Convoy HX-229 has altered course. New intercept point, grid BD-74. All units converge with all haste. Kremer stared at the slip of paper. He walked back to the chart table, his navigator, Obersteuermann Fischer, already plotting the new course. Fischer's face was grim. "Herr Callot, this makes no sense. For the convoy to be there, they would have had to change course hours ago. A sharp turn to the north. It's as if they knew we were waiting for them here." Kremer looked at the 2 plotted courses on the chart, the original predicted path of the convoy, and this new, abrupt diversion. They formed a perfect, avoidant V-shape. A ghost of a suspicion, too fantastical to be spoken aloud, began to form in his mind. It wasn't bad luck or poor reconnaissance. This was different. This felt like they were being watched by an unseen eye, their every move anticipated, their carefully laid plans rendered useless before they could even be executed. He felt a profound and unsettling shift in the nature of this war beneath the waves. The hunter was beginning to feel like the hunted. March 14th, 1943. 06 hours, Bletchley Park, England. 72 hours earlier, in a world away, in a room that smelled of old wood, strong tea, and the ozone of overheated vacuum tubes, a young woman named Eleanor Phelps stared at a sheet of seemingly nonsensical text. Her eyes, strained from a night shift under the harsh glow of Anglepoise lamps, scanned the lines of four-letter groupings: AIBQ, LXWC, ZVKP, MTOB. This was the Hydra traffic, the code used by the Kriegsmarine's U-boats, encrypted by the infamous Enigma machine. To the untrained eye, it was gibberish. To Eleanor and the thousands of others working in the sprawling, eccentric estate of Bletchley Park, it was a complex mathematical lock, and they held the key. The bombs clattering, room-sized electromechanical monsters housed in other buildings had done the initial brute force work, grinding through thousands of possible rotor settings. Now it was up to the cryptanalysts in Hut 8 to apply logic, intuition, and a deep understanding of German naval procedures to the crib's educated guesses about plain text within the cipher. Today, the crib was Wetter Vorhersage Biscaya. Weather forecast for the Bay of Biscay. Every day, at a set time, the weather report was transmitted, a predictable chink in the Enigma's armor. A few desks over, the legendary, notoriously eccentric mathematician Alan Turing muttered to himself, scribbling on a notepad, his tie askew and his hair a testament to his preoccupation with problems far beyond sartorial concerns. The atmosphere was a tense mixture of intense concentration and barely suppressed panic. The Battle of the Atlantic was being lost. Ships were sinking faster than they could be built. The pressure to break the naval Enigma, which had changed its settings just months before, causing a blackout in intelligence, was immense. Then it happened. Eleanor, cross-referencing the bomb output with a signal from the previous day, saw a pattern emerge. The letters began to shift, to resolve themselves in her mind. The jumble coalesced into coherent German. She didn't speak it fluently, but she recognized the structure, the headings. She carefully marked her worksheet and stood, her chair scraping softly on the linoleum floor. She walked to the desk of her superior, a calm, focused man named Hugh Alexander. "Sir," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "I believe we have it. The settings for the day." Alexander took the sheet, his eyes scanning the decrypted text. It was a routine status report from U-230, but its contents were irrelevant. The breakthrough was the settings themselves. The day's code was broken, a runner was dispatched, and within minutes, the teleprinters in the adjacent Naval Intelligence Office began to clatter to life, spewing forth translated German signals. The intelligence, codenamed Ultra, was born. The messages were rushed to the submarine tracking room in the Admiralty Citadel in London, a cavernous map-lined room where the faint smell of damp concrete mixed with cigarette smoke. Here, Commander Roger Wynne, a brilliant civilian lawyer turned naval intelligence officer, orchestrated the grand strategy. He stood before a massive wall map of the Atlantic, crisscrossed with lines and dotted with pins representing convoys and U-boats. A staff officer handed him the freshly decrypted Ultra signal, the precise coordinates for Wolfpack, unversagt, lying in wait for convoy HX-229. Wynn's eyes, sharp and intelligent behind his spectacles, darted from the U-boat positions to the current course of HX-229. He picked up a telephone, a direct line to the trade division. "I have an immediate routing change for HX-229, he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "Effective immediately. Divert to course north 75 degrees. Yes, I am aware that takes them through reported poor weather. It also takes them 60 miles clear of a waiting Wolfpack. Do it." And with that single quiet phone call in a locked room deep underground, the fate of dozens of ships and thousands of men was altered. The convoy turned, sliding silently through the fog and swelling seas, invisible to the Germans, while the U-boats waited, poised to strike a target that was no longer there. The greatest secret of the war was now in motion, and on the bridge of U-333, Kapitänleutnant Kramer was just beginning to feel its ghostly, unnerving presence. March 16, 1943. 14-hour hours. The bridge of the USS Bogue, North Atlantic. Aboard the escort carrier USS Bogue, the air was a brittle mix of salt spray and focused tension. Captain Giles E. Short stood on the bridge wing, his knuckles white on the cold steel railing. His ship, a converted merchant hull now sporting a short flight deck, was the heart of hunter-killer group TG-2111. Around him, the destroyers, Belknap and George E. Badger, cut through the steep gray waves, their bows plunging and sending plumes of white water into the air. The convoy, HX-229, was now 100 miles to the north, safely shepherded away from the Wolfpack's jaws. The Bogues and her consorts were not running. They were hunting. The orders from Admiralty had been stunningly specific. Not just a general warning of U-boats in the area, but a precise location. Grid BD-72, estimate 5-7 U-boats, converging. It was intelligence of a clarity no reconnaissance flight could ever provide. It felt to Short, almost like cheating. "Flight Ops report," Short barked into the voice tube. "Wildcats are airborne, sir. Providing top cover. 2 Avengers are on the deck, armed with depth charges and ready for launch." The voice from the flight deck controller was crackled with static. Short gave a grim nod. The Grumman TBF Avenger, a hulking, robust torpedo bomber, was their primary weapon. Today, however, the torpedoes were swapped for a payload of depth charges. They were going after a submerged contact, a shadow the sonar operators on the Belknap had picked up an hour ago, a U-boat desperately trying to reposition after the convoy had slipped its grasp. In the cockpit of Avenger 2B, Lieutenant J.G. Tom Connolly checked his instruments. The radial engine throbbed powerfully, the whole aircraft vibrating as it was positioned for launch. He felt the familiar lurch in his gut as the catapult fired, slinging him and his 2 crewmen off the short deck and into the turbulent sky. The orders were clear: proceed to coordinates provided by Belknap and prosecute the submerged contact. There was no search pattern. It was a direct assignment. Meanwhile, 60 feet below the surface, in the control room of U-333, the mood had shifted from confusion to palpable dread. The hydrophone operator, his face pale, ripped his headphones off. "Propeller noises, Herr Calo. High-speed screws. Closing fast. Bearing 190. Alarm." Kremer's voice cut through the compartment, calm but sharp. "Dive. Take her down to 150 meters. Rig for depth charges." The metallic clang of the alarm bell sent men scrambling. The boat tilted sharply, the electric motors whining as she plunged into the dark, cold depths. The crew braced themselves, their world shrinking to the groaning of the hull and the frantic pinging of Allied sonar that now echoed through the steel, a sound they called the saw. Above, Connolly saw the destroyer Belknap circling a patch of churning water. He banked his Avenger, lining up for his run. "That's it, boys," he said over the intercom. "He's right under the tea leaves. Let's give him something to remember us by." The Avenger dove, engine roaring. On Connolly's signal, his crewmen released the depth charges. They tumbled from the bomb bay, entering the water with a series of distinct splashes. The seconds stretched, then the ocean itself seemed to convulse. Massive geysers of water erupted behind the Avenger, followed by a deep, thunderous whump, whump, whump that shook the very air. Below, the concussions hit U-333 like a sledgehammer. Light bulbs shattered, instruments were thrown from their mounts, and men were thrown to the deck. A leak sprayed a jet of icy water from a valve seal. The boat shuddered, but the pressure hull held. Kremer, picking himself up from the deck plates, looked around at his shaken crew. Their eyes were wide with a new kind of fear. This was not a chance encounter. They had been deep, silent. The destroyer had come straight for them. The plane had dropped its charges with pinpoint accuracy. There was no doubt left in his mind. They weren't just hunting the convoy anymore. They were the ones being hunted, with a precision that defied all logic and naval doctrine. The unseen eye had found them, and it was guiding a fist of steel and high explosive from the sky. March 18th, 1943. 09 Saturn hours. The control room of U-333. A fine mist of condensation dripped from the cold steel pipes overhead. The air in U-333 was foul, laced with the acrid smell of fear, sweat, and the coppery tinge of ozone from overloaded electrical systems. For 48 hours they had been hunted. After the initial depth charging, the pinging had faded, only to return hours later with a new, relentless pursuer. They had crept away at silent running, their batteries dangerously low, the crew operating on nerve alone. Now, they were deep, the hull creaking under the immense pressure, a constant grim reminder of the ocean's weight above them. Kapitan Lieutenant Peter Kramer sat on the small stool in the control room, his face a mask of exhaustion and grim calculation. The navigator, Fisher, handed him the latest course plot. Best course for Lorient, Herr Callot. We can surface after nightfall to recharge. Kramer didn't look at the chart. His eyes were fixed on the bulkhead, but he was seeing something else entirely. The chart in BDU, the neat lines of the Wolfpack, the Phantom convoy. He thought of the lost boats, Sea Teufel, U-384, others who had simply stopped responding to signals. The Wolfpack, unversagt, had been mauled, not in a glorious fleet action, but in a series of isolated, brutal ambushes. Oberfunkmacht, Kramer said, his voice hoarse. The last signal from BDU, the one ordering the second repositioning. Was there anything unusual about it? The timing, the wording? The radio operator, the boy from Hamburg, looked puzzled. Unusual, Herr Callot. It was a standard format. But it was transmitted much later than the usual schedule, almost as if it was a reaction. A reaction, Kramer repeated softly. That was the heart of it. The Allies weren't just avoiding them. They were reacting to German moves with impossible speed. He stood up, the movement causing every eye in the control room to snap towards him. The trust that bound the U-boat arm together, trust in their technology, their command, their encrypted communications, was fracturing. A terrible, treasonous thought solidified in his mind. The Enigma is broken. He would never say it aloud. To voice it was to invite a court-martial for defeatism, to spread a poison that could cripple the entire U-boat campaign. But the suspicion was now a cold, hard stone in his gut. Every signal they sent to Lorient was potentially being read by the enemy before it was even decoded by their own command. They were broadcasting their positions, their intentions, their very fates into the ether for the Phantom in the Atlantic to devour. Later that night, when U-333 finally broke the surface under a canopy of indifferent stars, the lookouts scrambled onto the bridge with a new, jittery urgency. Every shadow on the water could be a destroyer. Every shift in the wind felt like the precursor to an attack. The boundless ocean, once their domain of freedom and terror, had become a claustrophobic trap. They were no longer the masters of the dark. They were prey, waiting for the hunter who always seemed to know exactly where they were. March 19th, 1943. 16 hours. The submarine tracking room, London. In the buried citadel, Commander Roger Wynne lit a cigarette, the smoke curling in the lamplight above his vast map. The pins representing Wolfpack, unversagt, were largely gone, scattered, sunk, or, like U-333, fleeing for home. Convoy HX-229, along with its precious cargo of tanks, fuel, and food, was now safely within the air cover range of the British Isles. A quiet satisfaction filled the room, but it was a sober one. They knew the cost. Ultra intercepts had confirmed the sinking of 3 U-boats from the pack directly due to their rerouting and the subsequent hunter-killer operations. But they also knew the Germans were not fools. The sudden, inexplicable evasions would be noted. The suspicious accuracy of the Allied attacks would be questioned. The window of advantage provided by Ultra was always precarious, dependent on the enemy's disbelief. Wynne looked at the map, at the thousands of miles of ocean it represented. The battle was far from over, but a corner had been turned. The happy time for the U-boats was truly, irrevocably over. The tide of the Battle of the Atlantic, which had been on a knife's edge just weeks before, was finally shifting. It had not been turned by bigger guns or thicker armor, but by the silent, invisible work of mathematicians, linguists, and wrens in a country house in Buckinghamshire. The war had been won not just on the waves, but in the realm of pure intellect. The stunned disbelief of the U-boat crews was the precise, calculated outcome of the greatest secret of the war,